Good afternoon and welcome to today's webcast entitled Solar PV Development Best Practices, Making Solar Work for Electric Co-ops and Municipal Utilities. My name is John Evans from Webcast Experts, and we're the producer of today's event. We're a division of Krishnan and Associates, a provider of technical marketing, market analytics, and business development consulting services specifically tailored to the global energy and power generation industries. Today's webinar will feature 4 presenters, each offering specific perspectives on making solar work. Blair Schooff is Chief Business Development Officer for Strata Solar based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He will address smart pathway options for planning, procurement, construction, operation, maintenance, and financing for any size PV project. Achyut Shrestha is Program Manager for the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center based in Raleigh, North Carolina. He will be discussing outreach and technical assistance available to electric cooperatives and municipal utilities to develop no-cost community solar programs. Katie Parker is Vegetation Construction Manager for Strata Solar. She will discuss a holistic approach and community focus on initiating sustainable landscape strategies that work for solar technology on social, economic, and environmental levels. And lastly, Bill Floyd is a project landowner whose property sits the Holstein LLC solar farm in Maxton, North Carolina. He will present property owner benefits of having an electricity cash crop while land stays within the family. If you have questions as this presentation proceeds, simply write them into the Q&A box on your screen. We will address as many questions as time permits at the conclusion of the presentation and provide email responses to any questions that we may not get to. We'll now turn the presentation over to Blair Schooff. Blair.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the introduction. And thanks to all of you for spending some time with us today. We know it's a particularly busy time of the year, and your time is very valuable, so thanks up front. It looks like there's a pretty varied audience today, so my intention here is really to keep everything pretty top line. But I encourage all of you who are interested in continuing this conversation to get in touch with me directly, and we can follow it up with a conversation or two around your interests in solar. So I really want to start with a little introduction to Strata. As John mentioned, we're a Chapel Hill-based developer, EPC, O&M, and asset management shop. We do everything from origination, from birth to death. And we've been at it for quite some time, specifically focused on the utility space since 2011. And this chart here has a little bit of chest beating. I apologize for it, but I wanted to point out a few numbers on this which adds to our credibility. Here on the left column, you can see we've got 1.2 gigawatts of projects installed. We've got about 3.5 gigawatts in our development pipeline. We've got $1 billion in our O&M portfolio, which is over a gigawatt, which includes not only our projects, but Dominion's projects as well, and that's an ever-expanding portfolio. And we've gotten up to about 350 full-time staff, but the number on this page that's most important to me is this 150 plus projects. The North Carolina market has been a very good market for solar and a very unique market wherein most of the projects, at least up till about last year, were around 5 megawatts in size because that was the QF size in North Carolina. So having to build 5 megawatts and build many of these over the years has afforded us an awful lot of experience in soil types, topographical types, interconnection experience, It's been a very enriching 5 years for us, and I think it's afforded us a lot of insight and education on what happens in the solar space. Now moving on, I want to talk about some of our partners and some of the work we've done with them and some of what's driven them into their interests in solar. First here we have Duke Energy. They're our local utility. They've been an excellent partner on many, many fronts. And their original interest in solar began really as a compliance to the REPS mandate in North Carolina. They have a certain amount of renewable energy credits or generation required of them over periods of time. And in 2011, 2012, they issued an RFP looking for 400 megawatts of solar. We put this Warsaw plant forward for that RFP, ended up winning that opportunity, and we built this project for Duke. They now own and operate that plant, and I think during that process and the other megawatts that they had built and installed, they really got a taste for what solar is and how competitive solar can be. That interest evolved into addressing one of their corporate customers down in Florida. This particular project on the upper right, Reedy Creek, doesn't accidentally look like Mickey Mouse. It's just adjacent to the Epcot Center. It was something that Disney was very interested in having crafted, and it actually has gained an awful lot of notoriety across the internet. And this is kind of brand work is something that we're going to be doing more and more of. And then following to this article here in the center, as Duke's interests in solar and renewables specifically has increased, they've gone out and solicited projects to build and operate outside of RFPs. So we built a 60 megawatt solar farm for them last year called Monroe. And the market in North Carolina has just taken a turn. We've gone away from our PURPA put into an agreement with the utility that allows for us to bid into a revolving RFP that's going to have many, many megawatts afforded to the industry over the next 4 to 5 years. And the interesting point to make there is that Duke has reserved the right to participate in that RFP themselves. So they're going to be bidding in as developer, again, to own and operate more solar. I think one of the things I'd heard their communications director say recently is that 1/3 of all their new generation moving forward is going to be from renewables. And my bet is that a big amount of that is going to come from the solar space. Another partner we've worked with quite a bit is Dominion. Our relationship began with them as we sold them a couple of projects that we built in TVA territory. So they've been an early owner and operator of solar. And the Commonwealth put a stake in the ground a few years back and declared a certain amount of their generation would be coming from renewables over a period of time, which really motivated Dominion to get further into the space. And a few years back, they put out an RFP for a 20 megawatt AC project, which we won, but the Utilities Commission decided that they wanted a little more interrogation into the process. And Dominion's reaction to that was very interesting. They put together a tripartite relationship with themselves, the Commonwealth that had set that goal, and a variety of new entrants, such as Amazon and Microsoft, who would essentially be contracting to buy the energy from these solar projects. And this model seems to be working very well. It's attracted a lot of interest from a lot of major tech corporates. Facebook just put out an RFP recently that's aimed at Virginia. And just this year, we've completed 5 large utility-scale projects for Dominion that span across both Amazon Web Services and Microsoft. So just another way that utilities are looking at and getting into the solar space. Lastly, here I'm going to talk about a project that we did with Mississippi Power Company. This was a bilateral PPA that we negotiated directly with them. And the purpose of this and what they testified at the Utility Commission was specifically to put downward pressure on rates over the 25 years of the PPA, specifically as a hedge against the volatility of natural gas in the future. So you'll see more and more solar coming online in Mississippi Power, again, to offset some of their potential liabilities against price. Now moving on to site development, really everything starts here with site location. You can easily predict the costs of your solar array above the ground. Your racking, your panels, your inverters, your wire, even your labor are pretty predictable. The panels certainly go up and down in price. It depends on whether you're using thin film or poly and where you're sourcing those products from. But generally, from quarter to quarter, you can kind of project what your costs are going to be above the ground. Below the ground is a different story altogether. All solar projects win or lose based on how well you understand where you're building. So what we do here is we start with a desktop analysis of all our projects. We decide where we want to go, and we use products such as the U.S. Geological Survey to evaluate topography. And we can also look at subsurface through the USGS. You can get an idea of what the soils are like. You can get an idea of depth to water table. You can certainly rule out sites, but you can rule in quite a lot from there. You also then can use the National Wetlands Inventory to get an idea of floodplain and what you're building on top of, and then turn to the U.S. County GIS to get parcel information, owner information, contact the owner, and get your option in place for the land. And after you get to that point, what we always do is we run a full geotech study on the site itself. We do borings. We get a complete and verified understanding of what's below the surface, what the soil is like, what rocks are there, what rocks aren't there, how deep the piles are going to need to go, what it's going to take to construct that site. Once you get to that point, really you start to look at your interconnection, your studies, and what upgrades might be applied to your site. Excuse me. You can use local knowledge to do an evaluation of your interconnection. You can also use national companies like DNV, and what they'll do is run a study on the lines, getting an understanding of the size of the plant that you're intending to build and where you're intending to interconnect. They will come back with a study that will project what's going to be required and what those costs will be, so that when you first submit for your system impact study and move towards your facility study, you're going to have a general understanding of what those costs are so you can model economically the viability of that project moving forward. And if everything's still looking good at that point, you're going to be moving towards your zoning. And the first thing you need to do, and what we encourage everybody in this space to do, is involve and inform the community right away. We hold town hall meetings, we knock on doors, we send out letters, we pass out leaflets, we make sure that the community is deeply involved, understands the project that we're intending to put into their community. The intention being is that if they're educated and they understand what it is versus what it isn't, that you can generally get the audience on side, and that really allows you to get through your zoning, whether it's a rezoning, a conditional use process, or special use. You can really get through those things much easier if you've got your community on side. And the last thing here is your environmental permitting. You need to make sure all of that's in place, certainly before and while you're constructing. You've got to have your phase 1, your phase 2, and in certain circumstances, a full NEPA review that might involve a public response. So moving on to EPC, and this is really focused on the PC side of things. What we've seen in the last few years, we used to be almost exclusively a fixed tilt shop because the price of tracker was just too high, and the amount of topography in the southeast was just too varied to rely on trackers making a difference in output. But what we found over the last few years is that tracker product has really shrunk in pixel size, and they become much more adaptable to variable terrain, and the price has come down considerably. So we are almost exclusively using trackers in all of our products at this point. There's also been a movement away from central inverters. Again, we used to be a giant SMA central inverter shop, but we've also found that certain products get discontinued, certain firmware is no longer supported. If you have an issue with one of your half megawatt inverters, you've got half a megawatt of your farm down until that repair takes place. So we've been moving to string inverters, which are far more commoditized, easy to replace. If you've got issues with any of your products, you can just swap your small string inverter out, and during the time it's down, you're just losing a small portion of your production. moving down to the construction side of things, quality is certainly key, and not just quality construction, but quality product. I mentioned poly panels earlier. Most of the poly modules that we source from Asia. That may or may not change depending on what happens in the Suniva ITC case that you've probably heard a little bit about. But when we are sourcing our panels from Asia, we typically have a QA company online at the facility itself doing flash testing, checking all the product as it's coming out of the assembly line to make sure that things that are delivered to us are going to stand up to the 20 or 25-year warranty that we're getting from that company. And all the product you use to build your solar array needs to stand up to that test of time. 25 years is a small amount of time for a solar facility. We generally get 40-year leases. Certainly you're going to be swapping product out during that time, but you need to have quality product and a quality build. Safety to us is absolutely critical. Both our RIR and EMR numbers are below 1. I think our RIR is 0.35 and EMR is 0.85. If you're going to do any construction work for any utility, be it a large utility or a muni or co-op, you certainly need to be in the safety numbers. And every day starts with a safety briefing on site. We have a safety manual that's custom for each project that we construct. We have a safety manual for each job that's on site. And we have safety staff on each site that essentially has ownership of that site. They can stop production, they can stop construction at any time. So safety is extremely critical to our operation, and we take it very seriously. And the last here is environmental compliance. DEQ, we found, in one instance, certainly has a lot of leverage to come in and make some decisions on your behalf if you don't have your stormwater permits and all your documents in order. So you have to make sure that you're environmentally compliant to your local ordinance. Now, on the ownership side, we've certainly seen a trend towards ownership on behalf of the utilities. RFPs certainly are winning the day these days, where at the end you can bid in, get a PPA, build a product against that PPA. But as I mentioned with Duke, there seems to be a trend towards utilities getting inside that RFP and owning product at the outside. Bilateral PPA negotiations seem to be becoming much scarcer, even though we've just won another one recently. But ownership certainly is on the rise. And in the instance where you might be a nonprofit and you can't utilize your tax credits, a shop like ours or somebody can certainly help structure a project by running a tax investor through. And as that tax investor flips out, the opportunity for you to own that asset comes to you in the 6th, 7th, or 8th year. So something we can certainly talk to you about and counsel you on. And lastly, one of the reasons we wanted to have this webinar today was to put some urgency in your minds about starting now if you haven't already. We know that your members have a genuine interest for renewable energy. We certainly have seen that products like solar can be used as a way to attract new technology companies and new business to your area. And even though the Clean Power Plan has been rolled back recently, who knows what's going to happen in the future of regulation. So having more renewable energy as your generation portfolio probably is smart. Certainly it guards against any future energy prices, any price changes that you have coming up. And there's also this investment tax credit that's going to be stepping down over the next few years. It's 30% now, but come 2021, it's going to be dropping down to 20%, and then 22 and 10 from the year 2022. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Achyut. And thank you.
Thank you, Blair. Hello, everybody. My name is Achyut Shrestha. I am the project manager at the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. And thank you, Strata Solar, for having me on the webinar. A little bit about my center. The North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center is a public service center in the College of Engineering at NC State University. We were established in the 1980s, and we were previously known as the Solar Center. Our center works to advance sustainable energy economy by providing support for different kinds of clean energy technologies. In line with our center's goals, I'm here to introduce our Community Solar for the Southeast project. Our community solar for the Southeast project is a 3-year project funded by the U.S. Department of Energy. The goal of the project is to assist in the deployment of community solar and community-scale solar system at municipal utilities and electric cooperatives all across the Southeast. We define community solar as a medium-sized solar facility where the energy output is shared by the community members. The primary purpose of such community solar is that it would allow members of the community and the community to get the opportunity at benefits of solar energy, especially if they're not able to install solar on their rooftop. Other benefits include that they receive cheaper solar PV due to economies of scale of a larger project. Similar to community solar, our project also supports community scale solar, which we define as any co-op or muni-owned generation facility that are approximately between 300 kilowatt to 5 megawatt in size. Since the muni or the co-op are effectively owned by all the customer members, all the benefits of the co-op owned solar gets passed on to all the co-op members, and we kind of qualify them as community solar as well. We're looking to work with co-ops and munis to support development of both these types of solar facilities. As a part of the project, our team at the center provides a comprehensive technical and outreach consulting services to deploy community solar projects. These services are available at no cost to the municipal utility or an electric co-op. Our service includes economic and technical modeling, basically to understand if the project is financially and technically feasible and different kind of financial options available, and also analyzing battery and storage options. Second, community solar program design guidance, which we help utilities understand different ways to design a community solar program. Third, we can help utility with a competitive procurement by helping them write RFPs or RFQ and selecting qualified developers to develop the project. Fourth, outreach and education, basically to help develop a communication strategy to reach out to their member customers and create awareness around community solar project. And lastly, demand aggregation, especially if there's more than one co-op in the region who are interested, then we could aggregate the demand into a single RFP, which would enable us to get better price for the project. As a part of the community solar project, this year we worked very closely with Fayetteville Public Works Commission to design and implement 1 megawatt solar with 500 kilowatt battery storage community solar project. To provide context, Fayetteville PWC is the largest municipal utility in North Carolina. We worked with Fayetteville PWC from the start by helping the town council and the utility leadership to understand community solar, followed up with an in-depth economic modeling to identify the value and cost for the project. This chart here demonstrates where the value from the community solar project is coming from. You can see here that about 60% of the value of the solar comes from solar energy generation, while about 38% comes from battery storage system, and 1.5% comes from the value of the renewable energy credits or RECs produced. Fayetteville Public Utility Commission had conducted an extensive customer survey which showed an overwhelming interest from their customers in community solar. And they ended up decided to design their community solar project as a subscription model, basically where a customer can subscribe to a certain percentage of the project and receive proportional benefits from the project. Our analysis showed that if the customer who subscribed to this project would see net benefits starting from year one, and the benefit would only increase as the years goes on. As Blair mentioned, there's various different ways to finance a community solar project. We analyze the costs and benefits for financing the project through different structures and what would that mean for Fayetteville Public Works Commission. We analyze different design options, including Fayetteville ownership with a monthly subscription, just Fayetteville ownership, direct ownership with no subscription, having only PV and different size systems, solar PV with different size systems, with a PPA option with a power purchase agreement or a PPA with solar and storage, and a partnership flip structure which would allow monetization of tax credits and a long-term ownership of the project from the co-op's part. Fayetteville PwC evaluated the costs and benefits of all these options and decided to go with the first option, either just direct ownership by Fayetteville Public Utility Board Commission with monthly subscriptions. This slide basically summarizes the benefits of community solar. My understanding is that co-ops and munis mostly care about three main things: resiliency, affordability, and customer engagement. And community solar can help achieve all of them. First step, it helps the co-op and munis to fulfill North Carolina Renewable Energy Portfolio standard requirements while providing customer choice options for solar energy. It also provides significant financial savings to the utility and also helps promote local energy resource and other benefits, including increased efficiency and resiliency benefits. And importantly, it also provides a way for co-op and munis to engage with their customers and increase their customer satisfaction. If your co-op or muni is interested in community solar or community scale solar, then please contact our center. We'd love to work with you and provide similar services that we did with Fayetteville PwC at no cost to your utility. This is the end of my presentation. I would now like to transition to Katie Parker from Strata Solar to talk about vegetation construction and solar development sites. Thank you.
While Blair and Achyut have focused on the business impacts of solar, myself and Bill Floyd will shift the focus slightly to the community impacts of solar. So I'm Katie Parker. I'm the Vegetation Construction Manager for Strata Solar. My background is in horticulture and landscape architecture, and I advise across multiple departments within Strata. Starting in development stages, I'll participate in those community meetings that Blair was talking about, introducing the project to neighbors, presenting images of anticipated views of the site, and generally just getting folks more familiar with solar. As the project moves into engineering and construction phases, we'll make recommendations on plant species for stabilization and screening, and ultimately on best management practices for long-term vegetation maintenance and land sustainability. To touch on a point that Blair made earlier, we do have the experience of installing 150 projects, and that experience has shown us that each site is unique. From town to town or county to county or state to state, each site has unique soil types, climate, topography, and hydrology, and we start very early in the development process to identify and analyze those overlapping systems. The geotech reports mentioned earlier do identify soil types, pH, and water tables and suitability for construction, but this information also informs our revegetation plan. What is going to grow best on this site based on these soils? Each project is permitted through the Department of Environmental Quality, and this identifies streams and other water bodies and really sets the guideline for our stormwater management and erosion control plans and ensures land and water quality during the construction process. Sites are also run through a clearinghouse with Wildlife Resources Commission and local fish and wildlife agencies. This identifies any threatened or endangered species, and all of these processes happen well in advance of any posts going in the ground. In addition to protecting any on-site resources, we have the ability to affect the landscape through sustainable practices during construction. We prefer to preserve any existing vegetation on-site. Local jurisdictions may require us to supplement plantings for screening, and we're also required to stabilize any disturbed areas with ground cover by the end of construction. This reseeding can really offer an opportunity to tailor the seeding mix to meet community or town goals. It can range from conventional low-growing turf grasses like Bermuda or fine fescue, all the way to low-growing native grasses like sedges, blue grama, or buffalo grass, just depending on your location. At Strata, we've effectively used these planting opportunities to implement sustainable landscape strategies. We have teamed with several agencies, including North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, to identify native grasses and wildflowers, plants like blanket flower and black-eyed Susans, to name a few, for use in and around our solar farms. Planting native wildflowers promotes pollinator populations through increased food source and habitat, and it's been shown that increasing habitat has had a positive impact on nearby farmers who are growing insect-pollinated crops. It also creates a colorful show for neighbors. We regularly plant native trees and shrubs in our landscape buffers wherever possible, plants like spruces and American hollies. These can really serve double duty as effective screening shrubs, but also promoting native ecosystems. In general, native plants have evolved with local soils, climates, and water patterns, and once they're established, they require little to no irrigation, fertilizers, or pesticides. Natives also have deeper, more complex root systems. This can increase stormwater infiltration, reduce runoff, and mitigate pollutants from moving into nearby water bodies. While native plantings have both positive benefits for neighbors and the environment, they can also reduce maintenance time and costs. There is a need for routine vegetation abatement, either through mechanical mowing or herbicide. This reduces shading and can promote peak production for the facility. So purposefully planting low-growing natives or turf grasses greatly reduces the need for multiple mowings throughout the growing season. We've also had success planting grazing mixes for sheep. This can also work to reduce the need for mechanical or chemical abatement. So really knowing what your intended long-term goals for maintenance are and then planning ahead are key for the sustainable strategies to succeed. And as much as we're dedicated to providing a sustainable energy source, Strata is also dedicated to being a good steward of the land. At the end of a project's life cycle, we want to be returning these landscapes in as good, if not better, condition than we found them, and also being good neighbors to the communities that we're a part of. And we do this through careful evaluation of existing conditions, protecting resources during construction, and promoting sustainable long-term maintenance plans. Thanks for your time this afternoon. I'm going to pass the presentation to Bill Floyd. He's the property owner at Holstein Farm, and he's going to talk more about the community impacts of solar.
Thank you. My name is Bill Floyd. I'm a lawyer, I'm a landowner, and a third-generation farmer in Scotland County, North Carolina. We have a solar farm in Maxton, North Carolina, a 20-megawatt system that was developed by Strata and went online in 2015. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the perspective of solar from a landowner's perspective. Primarily the people that you'll be dealing with in these cases will be farmers or people who are retired farmers who own large tracts of land, and those are the folks that you're going to be working with. What I want to focus on is why lease your land for solar as a farmer. And, you know, I can speak about our case. I also have an opportunity as a lawyer. I've worked with a lot of different people negotiating leases. But the big thing about land, about the solar projects for our land is that it has allowed us to keep the land in the family. As I said, we're third generation. My father is retirement age now. And oftentimes what we see in rural communities is you'll have an agricultural industry or agricultural facility that will, once the person retires, they'll have to make some decisions about income, and it'll be hard sometimes for them to keep the land without selling it or without leasing it for some other use. But this allows you to keep the land, you lease the land, you actually own the land for the term of the entire term of the lease. And that's a real big benefit for us if you have family members that are diverse and spread out. And again, it provides a retirement income for aging parents, aging farmers. The retirement income is much higher than they could generate from just leasing the land for agricultural purposes. So this retirement income allows them to enjoy the benefits of continuing to have the land for the next generation, but at the same time having significant income for their retirement. The rents that we see here in our area, I would say probably are 8 to 10 times higher for solar than they would be for a particular agricultural use. Not only that, but in addition to the income that you receive, the taxes, the property taxes are typically paid by the solar company, and that's an important aspect as well. So what does the process look like? You know, from a landowner's perspective, when someone comes in, the first thing that happens usually is there's the negotiation of lease terms that takes place. And the lease terms are very flexible for the most part. They deal with things like the length of the lease, what the responsibilities of the parties are, of course, what the rent's going to be, what happens when the project is decommissioned. And what I really want to emphasize that this process is really not linear, and it doesn't just move from one step to the next. Sometimes these things move together, or they move back and forth. For example, the zoning and land permits, sometimes at the end of this process you may have to go back and do it again because there may be some changes to the project that require a new conditional use permit. But what you see here is that unlike most landlord-tenant relationships, this process requires really a partnership between the landowner and the developer all the way through, because through this negotiation process, through the application to regulatory bodies, the completion of these studies, they're always going to involve communications with the owner of the land. There's going to have to be signatures obtained. There's going to have to be participation, usually in these conditional use permit hearings and zoning hearings with your local government. And so I like to look at these things really as a much more of a partnership from the very beginning, because it's often a long process of years that you need to develop with the landowner. And with that, come some suggestions, I think, about what we should consider, all of us together consider in this, that are developing solar. If you're a landowner, the first thing you have to do is you've really got to be confident in your relationship with the developer, because as I said, it's much more of a partnership than it is a landlord-tenant relationship. And when I say confident in your relationship, I mean you can communicate with them. You're kept up to date in some of these down periods when there's maybe PPA agreements are being negotiated, or there are other things that the landowner doesn't understand or doesn't know about. Being able to communicate in that situation is terribly important, and being able to trust each other to have the flexibility and expect flexibility from each other. When we developed our project, we started out with we started out with 5 megawatts and ended up 20 megawatts. And over time, it evolved and it changed. The footprint of the project changed. The regulations changed. Everything changes because it's a very fast-moving industry, of course. And so there are going to be times when you're going to need to go back to that landowner and you're going to say something like, we need a shade buffer here. We need an easement for a buffer. We need an access easement over here. What about if we took this piece over here? Maybe help me with your neighbor to get an additional piece of property. And you should expect that flexibility from the landowner, and then the landowner should also expect that flexibility from the developer as well, knowing that the developer is not out there just to try to maximize every penny that they can squeeze out of the landowner. There are a lot of people that are out there doing solar that have kind of come late to the process. But if you've got someone like Strata who knows the ropes, who's been through it, it's much better, much easier to work with. Some companies will come in and try to warehouse these leases, basically get a bunch of leases together, promise exorbitant prices for lease, and of course never develop the project. And from the very start of this project, if you're the landowner, your goal needs to be development, not getting the best or the highest price per acre on rent, but you're talking about something that can make such a significant financial impact on your life that development is really your key, and you need to maintain flexibility. Of course, as an attorney myself, I'm going to plug down there at the last that you really do need to retain an attorney prior to the execution of the ground lease. There are, again, a lot of flexible parts to that. And you need to have that confidence that someone's looking out for your interest for that as a landowner. The people I've worked with have been great in this industry. It's an industry full of energy and young people, and it really is great for the client and for the landowner, and it provides an alternative to these traditional crops that have such high risk, such high input, and such questionable return sometimes. With that, I am going to turn the program back over to John Evans, who is going to do the Q&A or start Q&A for the webcast. And thank y'all for letting me speak.
Yes, very good. Thanks to all speakers. That was excellent. As usual, we had a number of questions that came to us during the course of the presentation. Feel free to ask more in the time we have remaining. We'll probably have a number of minutes ahead of us to go through the questions that we've got. Okay, first question has to do, I guess we're starting to kind of go from the beginning. What kind of pushback do you see in the town hall meetings in the early stages? What kind of issues and pushback might you see?
John, that's Blair. I can take that. It's a mixed bag. I've had long conversations with pregnant women who are concerned that their groundwater was going to be contaminated, all the way through to having discussions with science teachers who thought photosynthesis was going to be disrupted because of the solar panels. One of the prime concerns comes from homeowners who believe that their property values are going to decline precipitously in relation to the solar array. All of these things we meet objectively, usually with third-party studies or through conversations. Most often, this really is a question of education and demonstrating the facts and spending time with these people to make sure they understand what the project is and what it's meant to be. I believe we've only lost one, maybe two conditional use hearings over the breadth of our 150 projects. And we've had significant contention on some of these from the upfront, and we usually get them solved through communication and education.
Maybe a comparison on renewable energy to that is some objections you hear from wind power offshore, where they say, not in my backyard, like I can no longer see Martha's Vineyard through those turbines. Is there those kinds of the not in my backyard?
There's most of it is NIMBYism, yes. But what we then set out to prove is how good a neighbor a solar farm is. You know, we're essentially adding to the tax coffers of the local community without the need for additional sewers or school buses or seats at schools. This is money that's coming into the community for the community to use as it sees fit. The neighbor's a quiet one. It's essentially, in certain circumstances, screened by plant buffers that are beautiful. The surrounding plant is great for pollinators and birds and local species. They really are a good neighbor, and sometimes the landowner may choose to put a pig farm there, which is certainly within their right and usually does not require any kind of use permit of any sort. And that tends to be where some of these farmers might want to be going. To Bill's point, they're looking to kind of maximize their revenue, keep the land intact and earning for them, and possibly something that they can bequeath to their children, and a solar farm is a magic way to do that. And NIMBYism certainly is the initial response, but again, through communication and through education and through spending time with people, you most often can get people where you need them to be, which is understanding that a solar farm makes an excellent neighbor.
Okay, excellent. In looking at the potential project analysis, how are weather patterns, seasonal weather patterns, factored in advance when you're considering a potential site for a project?
Again, John, I can take that one. So we project out revenue and energy from all of these plants on a forward basis of anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30 years. And we do that using historical data from those sites, looking back from anywhere from 50 to 100 years, and we use a variety of different databases to populate our models with that information. So it's not an exact science by using historical weather data, but it's the best we have, and frankly, over the last 7 years of our farms generating power, we've been pretty spot on.
Okay, excellent. On the vegetation side, if you had to deal with predatory species, predatory vegetation incursions in dealing with the landscape?
This is Katie. I'll take that question. We've established best management practices when coming onto a site to try and eradicate any nuisance vegetation that's there before we would purposefully plant the low-growing species to encourage. The best defense against weeds is to have a healthy, thick, lush lawn. That's true for your yard, and it's true for the solar farm as well. So the best approach is to try and get rid of those nuisance weeds before you plant the ground cover.
Okay. In addition to grasses and flowers, are trees ever part of your vegetation plan?
Quite often we do plant trees and shrubs as a screening buffer between, say, the farm and neighbors or the farm and an adjacent road. And our practice has been to plant natives where possible, often a mix of deciduous and evergreen trees. A lot of times the jurisdiction will dictate what's planted and where.
Okay. One of the attendees states that he'd like to see, if available, a lease agreement example that you could share. He's going to do community solar on a school and are working on an agreement. It would be nice to see a sample lease agreement for their team to look at. Any comment on that?
Certainly. Again, this is Blair, John. If that individual could get in touch with me directly, I can certainly provide them with our boilerplate lease that they can probably use as an effective tool. We can also look at providing also a purchase and sale agreement for them to have a look at.
Okay. In addition, we'll go one better. We have the name of the person who submitted that, and we'll pass that to you, Blair, so you can follow up directly. So
great. Thank you.
The attendee will be hearing from Strata on this. In these leases, does this eminent domain ever surface like what happens with highways? Is that ever an issue with the government involved or anybody?
It's interesting you say that. One of our projects, in fact, had to be moved because there had been a highway planned. I think for about 40 years, the highway had been potentially going to be running through a portion of the parcel. And any time you're dealing with title and attorneys, you need to make sure that all of that stuff is spotless and clean. So we tend to steer away from anything that has any instance of eminent domain attached to it. We do a lot of our title work way up front so that we make sure that those things don't bite us on the backside while we're under construction. So yeah, it is something that happens. It's rare, and it's rare only because we do our homework up front.
And this is Bill Floyd. I can also add to that. These projects are typically very large tracts of property, and in rural communities, that might involve pipelines that are going to be run through there, like the Piedmont Natural Gas Line that's been run through North Carolina. And so that does come up on these large tracts. When we're doing the smaller footprint, 35 acres or so, or 7 acres for some of these projects, we didn't have that problem. But it is an issue. It needs to be dealt with in the lease. It is rare, but it can be a very very detrimental thing, or can uproot an entire project if you get into that.
Okay. Once being a solar farmer, Bill, is any problems with the community service after the fact? Do things come up that were unforeseen? Is there things that may pop up, little watchwords to be on the lookout for, to plan in advance to avoid?
We haven't had any problems with the community, but it goes back to what Blair said, I think, at the very beginning, was you develop relationships with your neighbors, and to be a good neighbor, that means that you keep them informed about what's going on. That there's going to be a lot of action on that project while it's being developed, and then it's going to be fairly quiet except for the maintenance, and have that relationship with them to let them understand that this is not going to be making noise, it's not going to be producing an odor, it's not going to be producing any kind of traffic or anything else like that. And so we haven't had any problems. It is the best neighbor. There are other uses besides, solar farms that are much worse, as was described earlier. And I think it's been a great experience with our neighbors because we've kept them informed.
Okay. Has there been any unintended wildlife consequences? And again, I'll go back, and I'm not trying to pick on wind power, but there's a notion, actually it's stated in some fact, that birds can get caught up in the turbine blades out in California and other places. Any negative impacts on wildlife with solar? I can't think of anything obvious, but we're asking you.
And I can try that, John. I think there has been, with concentrated solar projects where there's mirrors in the tall salt shaft, I know that there's been some incidences where birds have been caught in a very hot ray of sunlight. But in terms of PV, there's really not any of that. I think there's one instant that we had happen to us a few years back. We tend to, on occasion, use sheep to graze inside our solar farms in order to keep the grasses low. It's something that we have done and will do more of in the future. And we did have this one instant where some wild dogs got inside the fence and had their way with a group of sheep. But outside of that, there really isn't anything that I can think of, and nor can Katie think of, nor have we experienced over the last 6 or 7 years that impacts any of the animals involved with our projects.
Okay. A couple of questions around the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. You mentioned you assist in preparing RFPs for EPCs. Could you elaborate a little more on precisely what you do in preparing RFPs? What is your specific role?
Yes. So this is Achyut Shrestha from the Clean Tech Center. If a co-op or a muni is interested in developing a community solar for their project or a community solar scale project, then we can help write a brief RFP, like for bids. So not including the technical specifications, but more like an outline of what the project would look like that the co-op or the muni wants. And so we can put this out RFP for bid, which is currently what we're doing with Fayetteville Public Utility Works. They decided to go with a request for qualifications instead of an RFP. So that project is out. RFQ is currently out, and there are a couple of developers who bid onto that project. So that would be a similar thing that we would work with other munis and co-ops to develop an RFQ and RFP to develop such projects. Thank you.
Are the services of North Carolina Clean Energy available to users outside of North Carolina? If I'm in Ohio or Indiana or Kentucky, are there similar organizations, or would you reach over or suggest assistance that those people may need?
Sure. This is Achyut Shrestha again. Our project is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy SunShot project, and which allows us to provide support for all co-ops and munis in North Carolina and 9 other southeast states, including from Virginia to Florida and to Mississippi, Louisiana, and all the states in between. So all the co-ops in southeast, we can provide our service at no cost. We are we do not provide our services to co-ops and munis other than situated in these 9 states. I'm sure there are various other consulting groups that may not provide such services for free, but there are a few that come to mind. CSA, Consumers Community Solar Collaborative, is very popular for development of community solar projects, and they're very active in the western part of the U.S. And there are other organizations that do as well, but they might not be subsidized or free of charge for the muni. Thank you.
Okay. A question regarding the leases. Are all of these projects built on the land leases, or have any farms been bought out by the landowners? The landowner becomes an owner-operator.
Goodness, John, I can take that. We operate both with leases and purchase and sale agreements, and in fact, we're tending towards purchasing the land for the farms. I don't recall of any instant where the landowner has bought the farm. Is that the question? Bought the solar farm?
Yeah, I think that's where the question was going, if I'm reading it right.
Not in our experience has the landowner bought the solar farm, but we do, as a practice, both lease and purchases, and in fact, we're tending more towards buying the land under our farms as opposed to leasing. Leasing is certainly a great option, and as Bill pointed out, it's an excellent option for estate management, for allowing farmers to add a different crop to their portfolio, and it's a great option for pushing cost out on a solar farm into the out years. But where we have additional capital, we've been moving a little bit more towards purchase options.
Okay. Solar projects' ability to attract new business to the state. How is that propagated? How's the PR, lack of a better word, put into play there? So the state departments of commerce, the utilities themselves. What are some of the mechanics to attract business around this?
I can address that, John. I'll give 1 or 2 examples. Our first large-scale utility projects outside of North Carolina were in a town called Selmer in Tennessee. And this is through a renewable standard offer that TVA had, and we worked very, very closely with the town to your point, ratchet up as much PR as we could around the projects. It's a very proud town, Selmer. It was a once big manufacturing town, Selmer, and it had really fallen on some pretty hard times. And they were intending to use this solar farm, or these 2 solar farms, 220 megawatts, as a way to attract new business. And the city and town council put out a lot of press on the event and backed that press up with a lot of information about the town. And in fact, what they ended up getting immediately on the back of that was GE decided to make one of their energy-efficient refrigerators there. There'd been an abandoned manufacturing facility that could be outfitted for something like this, and they won some business from GE that they are attributing directly to a solar farm, showing that Selmer was kind of turning a corner into the 21st century and demonstrating their ability to generate renewable energy. And it's very obvious when you look at the examples I put forward with Dominion earlier that many of these states and utilities are using renewable energy as a means with which to get anchor tenants inside their generation footprint. Facebook, Amazon, Google, every company that has a heavy dependence on data centers, banks. I mean, there isn't anybody these days that hasn't become more and more of an energy hog. And their customers, their clients, the people that they really are responsible towards, are more and more interested in knowing where the energy that these large corporates consume, where it's coming from. So the utilities are stepping into that mix and helping these companies define where their energy is coming from and what matters to their customers, and it's being used as a way to recruit new business.
Excellent. Okay. Do you see any irreversible aspects to the investment tax credit dwindling and going away? Is that a hurdle that the industry is ready to address or is addressing?
I can take that, John. It is. The investment tax credit was intended to go away a few years ago. When we started building utility scale projects, our intention always was to find pennies and compress them out of the mix. You know, our goal is to get down to parity as quickly as we could. We were ready for the ITC to disappear in 2016. It's wonderful that it's been extended. I think it extends the life and competition of other developers and EPCs in this space to kind of find their footing. But once again, we are ready for the ITC to start stepping down in the out years. Any company that's worth their salt, that's actually in it for the long haul, is going to be prepared for that. It's great that it's here still now with the Soneva case going on. There's always been uncertainty in this market. From quarter to quarter, there's something that comes out of left field that's either politically driven or, you know, it comes from somewhere. The panels are suddenly attached to a 30% tariff, or, you know, the REPS is going away. But any company that's looking forward, that's a business that isn't just sort of in this for the short term, is going to be prepared and ready for the ITC to disappear.
Okay, excellent. Well done, and this ends our allowable time. We're up against a hard stop. Any questions that may have been answered that we didn't get to, I think we got them all, but if there are any left over, and we'll get back to you directly by email. I'd like to thank the presenters, all four of you today, for an excellent presentation. We hope it's been productive for all of you attendees. Thank you all for spending some of your time with us today. This presentation has been produced and marketed by Webcast Experts, a division of Krishnan and Associates. In the future, keep an eye out for future events from us, bringing you more information on advanced products and services, specifically within the power generation industry. We can be contacted in Connecticut at 1-203-921-1800 or by email to Luke, L-U-K-E, at webcastexperts.com for any questions you may have on accessing any of our previously held webinars that are available on demand, or if you have interest in additional topics or webinar organization. This concludes today's presentation. Thank you and have a good day.